What's happening, guys? We're back. We're gonna get rolling on plumbing today. Alright, so just like we talked about last week, we got our aluminum bends that we're gonna hack up and make into boost pipes and coolant lines. But before we get rolling on that and start cutting up these aluminum bends, we need to make that bead roller to put a lip on the end of our pipes so that when we put a clamp over our silicone joiners, they don't just fall off. So today the plan is to get rolling on that bead roller. So the first thing we gotta do is we gotta make some dies. The two little like wheelie things that actually put the bead into it. So I got this chunk of solid bar stock, and this is our coolant piping, and it just barely fits in there. So this is the ideal size to make our dies out of. You want them to be as big as possible so that when they're rolling, they put the minimum amount of stress on the aluminum so that you don't tear it. So this is the right size, and bonus, we have it. So the price was right. So the plan to get rolling on this, I'll cut 2 slugs out of that bar stock. That'll turn into our 2 dies. And then I think I'm basically just gonna freehand the die shape into them. So yeah, we'll just see where it takes us. So let's get started. We'll start with the female die, because ladies first. Well, that was quite the endeavor. Turns out that my saw is buggered. It was taking like a super long time to cut through this solid, which I figured it would because I got a really fine blade on here for when we go to cut the tubing. But yeah, no, it turns out that my saw is just buggered and it keeps grinding and the blade keeps stopping. So we finished it off with the hacksaw. It took way too long to make one cut, but we're moving on. All right, we got our female die done. That was the easy one. We used that file just to kind of get the right curvature inside of the groove. So that's looking really good. I went ahead and cut off another chunk of the round bar. So this is gonna be our male die, the jack to this Jill. So it needs a little hump right there that'll mesh into the groove on the female die. So ideally when we put them together like that, we'll just see like not even a 1/16 of an inch of material, kind of just a little bit less than the thickness of our tubing. Now I could take this and just turn down basically the entire length of it, except for where I want that hump to be. But that's a lot of wasted material and a lot of time on the lathe. So I think what I'm gonna do instead is mark it, and then we'll just grab our welder and build up a nice little bead around there. just to give us the thickness, and then we'll throw it back on the lathe and round that off and shape it all into the die. So let's give it a whirl. If it doesn't work, we'll just start over or buy a new one. I don't know. Throw it in the garbage. All right, there's our male die all done. It turned out pretty good. We kind of tested the limits of that lathe. There's so much flex in the tool post on it that as soon as you try to take any kind of cut, it flexes, digs in, stalls the lathe. So we had to be pretty careful and pretty slow with them, but we got her done. It interfaces really nicely with the female die. I'll put a little picture right here that's in focus and close up. So next step is going to be through drilling them and mounting them onto something that'll allow us to clamp our pipe and spin them and do all kinds of cool stuff like that. But it's dark outside, so I'm going to head in for the night and catch up with you guys tomorrow. And we're back. All right, so first order of business today is to drill the hole through the middle of these dies that we built yesterday. That hole has to be pretty well bang on center because these things are gonna rotate up against each other. So if the holes are off center, they'll get further apart and closer together as you turn them, and it'll be really hard to get a nice even bead. So to get as perfect a hole as we can get, we're actually gonna drill the holes on the lathe. And in order to do that, we gotta pop that spindle out of my drill press, throw that in the tailstock of the lathe, and then cross our fingers and start drilling. So let's give it a shot. All right, we got our holes drilled into both of the dies. So these are pretty well done. We might have to do a little bit of fine tuning on the length to get them to mesh perfectly, but for right now they're done. So the next step is gonna be getting started on the frame, we'll call it. And the first thing we need to do is make two pieces that kind of slide inside of each other. So ideally we would just have two slit fit pieces of square tubing laying around, but I don't have that. So we're gonna make our own. We're gonna start with 1-inch angle iron and our 1-inch box section. And I'm just gonna cut two pieces of this angle iron and clamp them on opposite sides of our box section and then weld along the seam with the MIG welder. And that should make a piece of box section that our 1-inch will ride inside of. and then we can start drilling holes and figuring out our clamping mechanism from there. So let's cut it up and fire up the welder. All right, I turned you guys off last night because I just wanted to get some work done and trying to film and work, and it slows both operations down, and being a one-man show, I kind of gotta pick between the two. So I turned you guys off and just kind of put my head down, and I actually got a lot of work done. So this is our bead roller. I went through and cut a slot in the side there so that our dies can go up and down. And then I built a little traveler that goes on the inside there. Just a chunk of square tubing, capped the top of it off, and then welded a nut onto the top there so that we could run a bolt through and actually push down on that traveler. And then I welded our dies up to some bolts so that these go in there like that, and then because they're on that traveler, they can go up and down. And the whole concept was you spread them apart a little bit, you stick your tubing in, and then you start screwing down your bolt. That clamps your tubing, like that. And then I had a double nut arrangement on the back side here so I could spin them, and you spin those, and that turns your tubing around, and then you just keep tightening that top bolt until you make a nice pretty bead like that. So it did kind of work. I did make a bead. It's not a big enough bead, so I kept trying to put more and more torque onto that top bolt to make a bigger bead, and eventually I just broke the bolt. So I think what happened is we didn't make our dies aggressive enough, and essentially they ended up touching before I made a big enough bead. And then I just had metal on metal, and it didn't matter how hard I torqued on that bolt, it wasn't gonna make a bigger bead. So this is, I'm gonna call it a 9 out of 10 for effort, and a 6 out of 10 for execution, and a 1 out of 10 for result. It did make a bead, but it's garbage. So we need to do a lot of work. Either we need to make those dies bigger, more aggressive. We also need to strengthen up our torquing system, or we need to just look into a commercial one. I'm gonna take some time to kind of think about if this is gonna be worth it or not, and see what we can do on that front. But I'm not gonna spend a whole bunch of time and money trying to fix that if there's a commercially available option that's cheap and quick and we can get it. So I'm gonna call it an episode there. Next week, we might be working on the bead roller. We might just jump right onto tubing. There is another tool that I want to build before we get onto the tubing, and that's just kind of an angle guide or a cutting guide. Whenever you cut this tubing, it's easy to cut a straight piece of tubing square, but as soon as you start moving around the corner, you have to stay perpendicular to that bend, or else you end up with an ovaled cross section. So I might build a guide that'll keep my saw both straight and at the correct angle. Or not, we might just use a Sharpie and cross our fingers. We'll see. So that's it for this week, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, hit the like and subscribe button. Go check us out on Instagram, Left Foot First Media, and we'll see you next week. I'm out of here.